Jim, that's quite a journey. Welcome to Leadership Track.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Tell us about your first day on the job as a CEO at Gillette.
Well, I took the job at Gillette in January of 2001, but because of some personal commitments, I could not start till the middle of February. But what I did was I decided to do an analysis of the company based on public information. And actually, the company asked me if I wanted access to, the CFO, some of the key managers during this period of time. And I said, no, I think I just prefer to do my own research based on public information. So I kind of reached some conclusions about the company and put together a presentation that I decided to share with my management team on the first day. So about an hour after I got there, I had everybody come together in our conference room. And I said, well, I've got a presentation here based on what I've learned about the company from outside sources and doing my own analysis. And I'm going to share it with the board later in the week because I had a board meeting that week already. Tough way to start with a board meeting your first week. But I was prepared with this presentation. So we went through the presentation and we talked about, it talked about growth, it talked about cost, it talked about a lot of the financial measures. And at the end of it, I said, one of the things that I really notice about the company, it appears that our cost structure is not very competitive with what's happening in the industry. And in fact, I asked, when I had 15 direct reports in the room, I asked for everyone's opinion, and I said, first of all, how many think our costs are too high? And 15 hands, no hesitation, hands went up immediately. Then I said, okay, you represent the company's key departments in the company. How many of you think your department's costs are too high? No hands went up. So after the meeting, I dismissed everyone, and I said that I would have time for everybody to come in and meet with me independently over the next several hours. So I wanted to catch up and get to meet them personally and to learn a little bit about them and talk about some of the things they thought needed to happen at the company. And I'll never forget it. Each one of them came in, and the person in charge of sales would tell you that his group was just doing a great job, but those guys in manufacturing couldn't control costs or deliver product on time if they had to. The manufacturing guy would come in and say, well, those marketing people can waste more money and have more people to do nothing than you ever saw. So as I went through it, it was that whole phenomenon of, we have a big problem. We know we have a problem, but it's not my problem. It's somebody else's problem. And that was the first day, establishing, we had a problem, and then working with each of them to recognize that we were all part of the problem, and we were all going to be part of the solution.
Now, who do you collaborate with when you go into a new corporation like that right off the bat? Do you develop some quick allies, or do you do this on your own, or how do you work this?
Well, I put together a little team that actually two of my key people that I used to help me do the analysis for the 6 weeks, and they joined the company after I joined as part of my team. I had worked with these people for a long time, and they'd always been tremendously helpful to me, so they helped me with the analysis. But when you walk into a company, you really want to work with the management team that's there. You want to develop that team, give everybody a chance to show what they can do and a chance to show they can produce. I actually went in thinking that I would do a lot more change than I ultimately did. I did quite a bit, but I thought I'd do even more change with the management than I did. And it turns out we had some terrific people, and once they were given the right direction and participated in the solutions that needed to happen to turn the business around, they turned out to be tremendously effective performers.
That's great leadership. Now, what is it that attracts you to a failing business?
Well, I like all business, but I think failing businesses, it's all about creating that winning team, especially in businesses like I've been fortunate enough to work on in my career, are these great brands with great companies with great brands with great heritage that have fallen on tough times. So it's a little like being the coach, hopefully, of something like Notre Dame, that has got great heritage, great history, but had fallen on hard times. And what you want to do is try to turn around the program or turn around the company, build a great team, build people who are proud of what they do, can deliver results, and improve the company and make it a lot better. Yeah. Now, I must say that Notre Dame hasn't won a bowl game in a while, so I want to win a lot of bowl games.
But you see the potential in a company, or you wouldn't even put that in a category of a turnaround.
No, look at I look at almost every situation. And even when we were doing well at Gillette, after the turnaround really took about 3 years, and then I was there for a total of 6. And after the turnaround, what I really did was part of what we tried to create in the company was the idea of a constant turnaround mentality. We called it constructive dissatisfaction. We wanted people to feel that even when you're doing well, you can always do better. Look for those opportunities. Create something more than you've been left with. And I think that's something I feel very strongly about.
Now, you have an upcoming book, which I will talk about a little bit later, but in that you talk about the first 100 days being the most important in an organization. Explain that. What do you mean by that?
Well, I think in any organization, when you come into a difficult situation, people want to see the new management, see what they're all about, and see if they can buy into the program.
When you went to Gillette, though, the management, there was a refusal to accept reality. That was a little bit of a problem. Could you explain that? How did you handle that?
Another good example of that reality was in our blade and razor business, which had performed a little bit better than some of the other businesses. But one of the fellows I really enjoyed working with was the president of that division, who was there for over 30 years. And when I talked to him about his business, he said, you really should, help the guys on Braun, or help the guys on Duracell, or help the people who are working on Right Guard, because they've fallen in really tough times. And in blades and razors, we're really doing pretty well. And I said, that's interesting, because based on my analysis, about 80% of the value of the company is in the blades and razors business. And I said, why did the stock come down by 50% if we were doing so well in this 80% business? And I think at that point he had a realization too that, maybe we could do a lot better.
A question well placed does a lot of good.
It sure does.
Yeah. What is your criterion for selecting a management team?
Well, it's pretty straightforward. I like people who are open, who are honest, and who are trustworthy.
Well, you've led very large organizations, and within those organizations, especially at the management level, I'm sure you've seen mistakes made over the years. How do you handle mistakes by management?
Well, I say I have a policy, don't make dumb mistakes. And I define dumb mistakes as either not doing the proper analysis or not getting the right collaboration or group together to tackle a problem and really doing it in isolation and making decisions that don't work. So we don't like dumb mistakes. And then I have a second policy that says only make smart mistakes once. Good organization is going to make mistakes. They're going to do analysis, they're going to try their best, they're going to get collaboration, but they'll still make mistakes. They'll do some things wrong because their analysis may have been flawed in one way or another. Their information might not have been complete enough, and you'll find that mistakes are made. And what you have to do is correct those mistakes quickly, course correct quickly, but importantly, lessons learned. Figure out what you've learned from those mistakes and make sure you don't repeat them. The worst thing you can do is make a smart mistake and then 2 years later make it again.
Your circle of doom theory has become folklore in the companies that you've led. What is the circle of doom, and how does it manifest itself in an organization? Yeah,
I define a circle of doom as a lot of companies get into problems because they set unrealistic goals. And then what they do is they start chasing those goals. They throw overhead at the attempt to reach those lofty goals. They overinvest in capital. They might invest in marginal technologies, and then what happens is they start missing their goals, and they've touted these goals to Wall Street, and they start missing them. And what they do when they start missing is begin cutting back the marketing. Then what they do is they take some pricing to try to offset those misses. And what they wind up doing is still missing their goals and getting even deeper into the pricing, the cuts in marketing result in even greater shortfalls in sales. So you get into this circle that it just gets worse and worse and worse. And the more you cut, the more you try to fix try to achieve your expectations, the greater in the hole that you get. My dad often said, when you get in a hole, stop digging. And that was was great advice for me over the years, but that's what the circle of doom is all about.
Sure, and you talk about flawed decisions that build on one another, so it sounds like that's part of what you're referring to there.
Yeah, I talk about the story of the frog. If you take a frog and you throw him in boiling water, it jumps right out. On the other hand, if you put a frog in cool water and slowly raise that temperature, he's fully cooked. And a lot of times companies get in those kind of trouble, in that kind of trouble, because they make a series of small decisions that lead them down a bad path, that get them into trouble. And they have trouble. It's a series of small decisions that really get them into a situation where they enter the circle of doom.
And they keep digging.
And they keep
One
digging.
flawed decision builds on the other.
That's right.
A San Francisco business writer said that Jim Kilts has been involved in more turnarounds than a conductor on a San Francisco cable car. A nice illustration, and you have been involved in a lot of turnarounds. What are the principles that you use in turning a company around?
Well, it's those
alluded to them.
Yeah, it's those things I talked about. It's integrity, and I really defining integrity narrowly here as the intellectual integrity that it takes to determine what the real problems are. I think one of the most challenging thing any company has when it gets in trouble is to recognize what's the problem. So it's doing that kind of analysis and being able to deal with the fact that many times you were part of the problem, and now you have to take a step back and say, what is the real problem, communicate that to the organization so you can start looking for solutions.
So the problem named is the problem solved.
The problem named is the problem
And
solved.
if you're not naming the problem correctly, it becomes a predicament which will show up again.
That's right. And one of the hardest things you can do, and I found this through all the turnarounds, is to really define the problem. It's really to come to grips with what is the problem. It always manifests itself in lower sales or lower earnings. But really, what is the problem? Is it a strategic problem? Is it an executional problem? What is the problem? And that's what I call the intellectual integrity, to come to grips and say, this is the problem, and we need to do something about it.
What's the second principle that you use?
The second principle is the enthusiasm. And as I said, everybody wants those people with fire in their belly. They want people who can get an organization charged up about doing something about the predicament they're in. So I think enthusiasm is absolutely critical. You have to convince employees and your team that problems can be solved. And it's the old adage of, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. Sure. And the ability to believe that you can change things and that you have the tools to change things is something you need to instill in the organization through that enthusiasm.
What's that third principle?
It's action. And as I said earlier, you're never going to have all the information you need to decide on the right action steps. You're going to always want more analysis. You're going to have more inputs. And you have to figure out what things need to be accomplished right away. What are the 80% of the information that's critical? And forget about that last 20%. In some cases, you might even have to take 51% of the information that's available and make a decision and move to action. I think, again, the key thing there is if you move to action, you want to get some early wins, and if you make some mistakes, correct them quickly. And by doing nothing, you'll never know if you're making the right choice or not. A lot of times you can make choices and course correct as you go and really find the right path to win in the marketplace.
I would think, too, people could hide behind their fear or camouflage their fear by using a need for more data before we take a step here.
That's right. Well, and it's a little like when I always come into a company, I insist on starting a strategic planning process and develop a strategic plan. In almost every company I've gone through, even divisions in my younger days, I would say, we've got to get a plan for this division that I'm in charge of. And people would always say, geez, we've got so much going on. The last thing we have time to do is develop a strategic plan. We got so many things to execute.
What was the fourth principle?
The fourth principle was understanding the consumer and the customer. Basically, in any of these situations, you need to connect with your consumers and your customers. You need to understand what they're all about, what they want, what they're looking for. Are you satisfying them? So I found at Nabisco and at Kraft, when I came to the company, if you ask the internal people who are responsible, how are consumers and customers reacting to some of the changes that we've made, that you've made, and the results that you've gotten? Well, the customers, they're all right. The consumers are still buying the product, and really dismissing some of the underlying trends that were causing the missed sales and the missed earnings.
There's so many creative commercials that you've done over the years. We don't have time in this program to watch them all, but there's one that really touched me at a visceral level. And let's watch this commercial and you comment on that.
Inside that camera is something familiar, a battery. And while you might think all batteries are the same, consider what happened here last winter when a heart stopped and his life depended on a Zoll electronic defibrillator. And Zoll trusts only one brand of battery, Duracell. So whether it's saving a moment or saving a life, it just has to work. Duracell, trusted everywhere.
This is one of my favorite commercials, too. I think what we did at Duracell was we learned how important batteries were in moments when consumers had the need for a great deal of trust in a brand. And it was reflected actually when we had, for example, a hurricane in Florida. If you go to the stores, Duracell batteries in a hurricane situation would be the ones that sell down the quickest. And what happened was it gave you some idea that when it's important, you want a battery you can count on, one with consistent quality that you can trust. And we kind of captured that essence in this particular commercial, and it's done great things for the business. It's really been a business that or a commercial that had captured the essence of what the Duracell brand is all about.
Now, these are strong brands already, but explain how you build on brand strength. That's really big in your repertoire.
Yeah, well, what I love to do is take, and when you really look at brands, I've loved creating brands over time. I had the good fortune to help create the Country Time Lemonade brand, the Crystal Light brand, the Lunchables brand at Oscar Mayer. And so I love creating brands, but I also love turning around brands that are tired. Someone once told me there are no such thing as tired brands, only tired managers. I think that's not always true, but to a great degree it is true. So what I like to do is take brands that have been created years ago that we're responsible for as managers to protect this great equity. And I really like to try to breathe new life into them, to introduce new and innovative ways of thinking about the benefits that those brands provide and helping to use that as a way of revitalizing them.
Build on your strengths.
That's right.
Now, you've learned to lead during a turnaround. How would those skills differ from leading a company that's flying high?
The hardest thing in a company that's doing well is to convince people that there's a need for change. And because if you're doing well, geez, you can just show up and kind of ride the wave. What you have to have is that constructive dissatisfaction. Never be happy that you're doing things good enough. Always feel you can always do things better, and figure out what things make the most difference and work on those.
I love that. Constructive dissatisfaction. It's a healthy dissatisfaction. It doesn't mean that you don't see where you've come and your strengths and the progress you've made, but again, we can make this even better. You have to continue to grow, develop, make progress.
That's right. That's right.
As soon
And
as
that's
you
what's
stop growing,
exciting.
you stop bleeding.
That's right. That's exciting, and it excites organizations. When you think of that, you want to give organizations credit for what they've accomplished, but you also want them to improve.